President Dana White here to announce some more badass fights.
Fellas, we're going to be having a little bit of a talk about everything that has gone down in combat sports this week again. Some fight announcements, basically everything significant that has gone down this week. Recapping UFC 304, everything that needs to be talked about in combat sports this week, we're going to be having a little bit of a talk about. So let me know your thoughts on what has gone down this week in combat sports. And we'll start off with the major fight announcements. The first major fight announcement this week has been Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. It's official for October 5th at UFC 307. I actually really like this matchup because first of all, they're killing two birds with one stone. At least one boring contender is now going to be shut down. We're not having two up-and-coming boring contenders, so they've kind of just killed two birds with one stone, which I'm happy about. But it's also going to be interesting to see how you put, what happens when you put two heavy grapplers against each other. Obviously, Aljamain Sterling, former bantamweight champion, came up to the featherweight division, dominated Calvin Kattar, and now he's facing another really good wrestler in Movsar Evloev. Maybe his fight with Allen was quite disappointing, but he's undefeated. He's a decent prospect in the featherweight division. It's going to be interesting to see how they do against each other. I am leaning towards picking Sterling to win this fight though. I think he's got the upper hand in everywhere. I don't know if it's a number one contender fight though, because there's just a lot of contenders in the featherweight division. I mean, you've got Holloway, Volkanovski, you've got Brian Ortega as well, you've got Allen and Giga Chikadze, so I don't know if it's actually going to be a number one contender fight, but it's going to be interesting to see. I am leaning towards Sterling winning that fight, but yeah, it's a fun grappling matchup for UFC 307. Glad to see Sterling back in there. So, and they've also been going at it on Twitter a lot. I don't know if it's actually Evloev or his manager, but Evloev's been talking a lot on Twitter to Sterling, so they've been hyping it up on Twitter, so it's going to be interesting to see. Then we move on to UFC Abu Dhabi. Nick Diaz versus Vicente Luque is no longer going to be on UFC Abu Dhabi. It's because of travel issues, but let's be completely honest, it's just because Nick Diaz doesn't want to fight in Abu Dhabi. Now, it's not been fully cancelled, it's just been rescheduled to a later date. Now, I don't know what that date is. They've not told us anything. All we know is that it's not going to be on UFC Abu Dhabi anymore, which I'm not too bothered about, and instead it's going to be replaced with Sharapouti Magomedov and Makal. I kind of feel bad for this dude because it feels like whenever there's a new prospect or a new guy in the UFC who they want to win, they just feed Makal to them. They did it with Caio Bravo, they did it with Michel Pereira, they did it with Kevin Holland, and now they're doing it with Sharapouti Magomedov, so fair play to Makal. The dude has some balls on him. In terms of the fight, I think it's going to be interesting to see. At least we get to see Sharapouti Magomedov fight again. I assume he was going to be scheduled to be fighting on UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi anyway, because obviously he can only fight in Abu Dhabi, so it's good that we still get to see him. I think this is the core main event, and it's going to be a fun striking matchup. I'm expecting Sharapouti Magomedov to win this, and then hopefully if he does beat Makal, we can start seeing him against some higher competition, because he's had two fights in the UFC already. His last fight was against an absolute can. If he can beat Makal, we need a bit of a step up in competition for Sharapouti Magomedov. So that's now the official core-main event of UFC Abu Dhabi instead of Nick Diaz and Vicente Luque. Another fight that has been announced is Cody Garbrandt versus Miles Johns. This is an interesting matchup for Cody Garbrandt. I'm going to say this as well. I feel like Cody Garbrandt, since his fight with Davison Figueiredo, he's kind of been being overhated for that performance. I know he got finished in the second, but he didn't look that bad on the feet. Like, if you think about it, he actually looked really good on the feet with Figueiredo in that fight. And before that, he KO'd Brian Kelleher. Miles Johns isn't overly amazing. I mean, he's fighting the likes of Cody Gibson, which just tells you everything you need to know about him. He's not overly dangerous, even though it is Cody Garbrandt that he's facing. And he's not overly well-rounded, so I am expecting Cody Garbrandt to go out there and win this. I don't know which UFC event it's going to be on, but it is going to be on October 12th, so probably some sort of fight night. So it's going to be interesting to see Cody Garbrandt back against Miles Johns. I'm expecting Garbrandt to win this one. If he loses, I think it's going to be time to pack the gloves up. And talking of Cody Garbrandt, he now recently came out with this new face tattoo. And it's got to be one of the worst face tattoos in MMA. I mean, if his tattoos before weren't questionable, this new face tattoo has to go down as pound for pound one of the worst tattoos in the UFC. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know if it was a dare. I don't know if it's permanent, but it's just a horrible decision for Cody Garbrandt. But we do get to see him back. And then another fight announcement is Nursultan Ruziboyev versus Rinat Fakhretdinov. Two decent welterweights going at it. It's going to be interesting to see this fight because they're both very dangerous as well. Ruziboyev obviously recently lost to Buckley, but he's a very dangerous and tall striker. He is massive for the welterweight division. And Rinat Fakhretdinov, the guy who absolutely slaughtered Kevin Lee, and then in his last fight, obviously beat Nicholas Dalby, but it was quite a close fight. So it's going to be interesting to see. Can almost guarantee it's not going to go the distance. I think it's going to be an absolute war on the feet. This is for the Abu Dhabi card at UFC 308, so that card's already shaping up to be good. I'm assuming Makhachev and Sarukian are going to be on that card as well, maybe Chimaev as well. So that's a new fight. I'm really big fan of that fight as well. And then a couple of the other fight announcements we have is Trevor Peek versus Yanal Ashmouz. That's a really good fight as well. Yanal is super dangerous. Pretty sure he got injured against Christian Leroy Duncan. What's his name? Christian Duncan, the Scottish dude in the last fight. And Trevor Peek, can't wait to see him back in there as well. And Raul Rosas Jr. is back as well. So that's a couple of more fight announcements that we have this week. Nothing too significant. Nothing, nothing from the big pay-per-view stars. But there is a new UFC rule system that hands on the floor do not count as a grounded opponent. So for Movsar Evloev, his career's finished. If only this rule would have been implemented before Arnold Allen and Movsar Evloev. So the Dagestanis, Makhaevs, the Evloevs, they need to find some sort of new change to their game plan. So a fighter must now have at least one knee on the ground to prevent their opponent from kicking and kneeing them to the head. So you can't just, put your palm to the ground. And I'm pretty sure they're allowing 12-6 elbows. John Jones has been going off on Twitter saying that he's now undefeated, because I'm pretty sure they allow 12-6 elbows now in the UFC, so there's been some massive rule changes. I don't know when it's going to be implemented. Apparently it's going to be implemented for October 1st, so it's going to be interesting to see how the Abu Dhabi card does from that. But yeah, some new big rules in the UFC. Recently at the UFC 304 press conference, Dana White confirmed that the winner of Blades and Aspinall is going to be fighting John Jones, but it's easy to say that, but let's be completely honest. When John Jones does beat Stipe Miocic, he's going to retire, but this also confirms that we're probably not going to be seeing Alex Pereira versus John Jones, because, Jones is going to have to beat Aspinall first, assuming that Aspinall beats Blades, and every finishing bonus on UFC 304 is now going to be to 100k. Is this going to be the new thing that we see at every UFC press conference now, where the fighter just asks Dana for 100k? Because what's he supposed to do? He can't really reject it. It's going to be interesting. I think they should just permanently move it to 100k, because it's just going to be this repetitive thing where every press conference someone just asks for 100k. So I don't know if this is going to be a permanent thing, but hopefully that makes the fights better at UFC 304. Talking to UFC 304, Paddy Pimblett and Leon Edwards have some custom shorts. Paddy Pimblett's shorts kind of reminiscent of his old Cage Warriors shorts, nothing crazy. And Leon's got some nice green shorts. I still think to this day Justin Gaethje has the worst custom shorts, but again, I think this is going to be a repetitive thing when it comes to pay-per-views, that at least two fighters get some custom shorts. It seems to have just stuck since UFC 300. Nearly every single card we've had some fighters with some custom shorts, so maybe that's a new thing that they have in the UFC. Talking to UFC 304, Muhammad Mokaev and Manel Kape had a fight in the Fighters Hotel. Apparently what went on was Muhammad Mokaev invited Manel Kape for a picture before their fight, and then him and his team jumped Manel Kape. There's like a video of them fighting, but you can't even see Muhammad Mokaev and Manel Kape, so it's a bit of a useless video. And there is a picture going around of Mokaev with like a big cut on his forehead, so I wish they were at the UFC 304 press conference, man. These would have gone at it at the press conference. Dana White, I don't know what he was thinking by moving this to the early prelims. That's some other news as well. It's now been moved to the early prelims. I really don't know why they've done that. It's probably a title eliminator, right? The winner of this fight is probably going to get a title shot. They've got a lot of animosity towards each other. They're two highly ranked guys. Why is he not on the main card of UFC 304? And apparently it's now been moved all the way to the early prelims. They would have sold it, sold the fight at the press conference, so it's quite disappointing that, they're now all the way in the prelims. I assume they're just trying to get bums on seats as early as possible, but this is a main card fight, and even though I know Mokaev gets a lot of hate, it still should have been on the main card, especially for the press conference, which is quite disappointing to see. Alex Pereira seems to have a fight booked. He's posted a picture of Dana White calling him, an edited picture of Dana White calling him on, I think, Twitter, which kind of confirms that Pereira's probably going to be fighting soon. Now, I don't know which card he's going to be fighting on, because it's not going to be 307, it's not going to be 308, 309, it could be UFC 309, but again, I'm not sure, so it's probably going to be by the end of this year, November, December time. But yeah, apart from that, we've got UFC 304 this week. I can't wait for UFC 304. I can't remember the last time I was this excited top to bottom for a pay-per-view. We've had some pretty decent pay-per-views recently, but they've kind of all flopped. But I feel like whenever UFC goes to the UK, it's completely different, man. I still think it's the best pay-per-view that the UFC have done in the UK to this day, so I can't wait for UFC 304. But that is pretty much everything significant summed up that has gone down in combat sports this week. Let me know your thoughts, let me know your predictions for UFC 304 this week, and thank you for watching.